If there was one single question that opened the door to divorce, child abuse, drug addiction, gangs, war, and even death itself, what do you think that question might be? If there's this thing out here, this fruit that can make me smarter, and God's blocking me from it, is he keeping something good away from me? Is he being selfish and blocking me from getting something that would be helpful to me? Or is he protecting me? Just a warning, today this sermon could be 4 hours long. But the good news is it won't be 4 hours. And the other better news is I'm going to do my best to make it interesting and absolutely worth your time. So let's pray. Our dear Heavenly Father, thank you very much for another day. Thank you especially for another Sabbath, Lord. As we consider what I think to be some of the foundations of our relationship with you, Lord, and how we stay connected with you and follow you and allow you to live in us and through us. Please open our hearts and minds to hear your truth, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. What is the one question that led to all suffering on earth and the best perspective to help you answer it well? It's a long title, right? I get it. What is the one question that led to all suffering on earth and the best perspective to help you answer it well? If there was one single question that opened the door to divorce, child abuse, drug addiction, gangs, war, and even death itself, what do you think that question might be?
Where is God in all of this?
That's very close. That's very close. Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 3, because you're definitely going in the right direction. Genesis chapter 3, and you guys actually know the story in broad scope, of course, right? This is Adam and Eve. Eve meets the snake in the Garden of Eden. In the sake of being faster, I'm going to try and skip part of it. And so here you have Eve at the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the snake's tempting her, and he asked the woman, did God really say you must never eat of the fruit of the tree in the garden? The woman answered the snake. This is verse 2. You were allowed to eat the fruit from any tree in the garden except the tree in the middle of the garden. God said, you must never eat it or touch it. If you do, you will die. Verse 4. You certainly won't die, the snake told the woman. That's just a blatant lie. But do you notice how it appeared to be true? Because Eve and Adam didn't die immediately, right? But anyway, verse 5. God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The woman saw that the tree had fruit, that it was good to eat, nice to look at, and desirable for making one wise. So she took some of that fruit and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Now, when you do something, do you just do it, or do you have a thought before you actually take that action? You think about it first. If you came to me right now, if you got up out of your seat and came up here, would you think about, let me get up and walk, right? So some thinking process was going on with Eve. And I would suggest to you that she asked herself a very specific question. The snake says, God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened, you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, it's not directly stated here, but the inference is, but God's not letting you eat it because he doesn't want you to be as smart as he is. Now, if you heard that, what question would pop into your mind? There's this thing, this fruit, that can make you just as smart as God, but God's blocking you from getting it because then you'll be as smart as he is.
See, you're getting at, is God hiding something from us? Or is he...
You're getting there.
Are we lower than him? Is he using us? That, and I also got from that is that Satan tried to pass off what happened to him on earth.
Well, here's the question. At its most basic level, I think the question is this. Can I completely, capital, C-O-M-P-T, whatever, completely trust God? If there's this thing out here, this fruit that can make me smarter, and God's blocking me from it, is he keeping something good away from me? Is he being selfish and blocking me from getting something that would be helpful to me? Or is he protecting me? Can I trust that God is going to do good for me? Does that make sense? Does that seem like that's the basic question she's asking?
That makes perfect sense because that's what humans do.
Well, Eve was human. We're all descendants of Eve.
Yeah, we tend
Eve was
to
human.
judge other people through our own thoughts.
So that's the basic question. Now let's see how this plays out a little bit. Can I trust God completely? Is he blocking me from getting wiser to keep something good just for himself? That's the basic question that's going on in Eve's mind. Now I have a question for you, a couple of questions. Is it evil to eat fruit? Okay. Is the desire to be smarter something bad? Then how is it that simply asking this question, can I trust God completely? How can that be the gateway to all these problems in the world? You notice we tend to think of evil as being, I want to do something bad. I want to go sleep with a bunch of other women who aren't my wife. I want to deal drugs and get money. I want to, whatever it is, I want to go kill somebody. But you notice Eve ate fruit and wanted to be smarter, none of which is bad. So how do we get from that to all the problems we have here? But first, we need to ask this, we need to move on to this. Have you ever questioned whether you could trust God? Is it just Eve who had this question, or is it us? While you're thinking about a time whether you may have questioned whether God can be completely trusted, I want you to think about it because I want you to share it. I'm going to answer part of that question for myself. There were 2 times, at least twice, where I really had big questions in my life. Could I really, truly trust God? The first time was the first time I was married, or more accurately, the end of the first time I was married. So for that to make sense, I need to explain to you a little bit how I got together with my first wife. We met because she moved into the town I lived in, or near the area I lived in, and she came to take a job at the local Adventist church school. So she was an Adventist church school teacher. And the principal, who knew me, knew that I was single, said, and by the way, she's 23 and single. That's how I first knew anything at all about her. We hung out a little bit, and I thought she was pretty cool, and I actually thought she kind of liked me. But the reality was I didn't really feel that chemistry for us. And we went out together. We took a drive from Dinuba out to the coast. And we were on the way back, driving back. And I was thinking, I'm like, okay, she's a neat person. I kind of like her, but I don't like her that way. And I should be honest. So I'm struggling with trying to tell her because I think that she's interested in me and I want to set the record straight. And literally at that moment, as I was thinking in my head, trying to figure out the words to say it, the heater core of my car blew up. And by the way, it's the only vehicle I've ever had where that's ever happened. So, not saying that it wasn't God doing it, but it seemed to me like it could have been. It steamed up the window almost immediately. And by the way, at this point, it was already getting dark. And so I'm driving along at dark, and all of a sudden, it's like instantaneous, hugely thick fog on the windshield. And I can't drive. There's no way I can see enough to drive. So I'm pulling over on the side of the road, and I spent the whole evening trying to hitchhike back into town, get some tools so I can kind of fix it. We ended up getting a ride from a guy who wanted to charge me $20 to use his tools, or $40. Yeah, it was a really weird freaking thing. And in this whole process, it turns out that she's actually very capable and very helpful in getting this car fixed so we could go home. And I went from, in my mind, going, I'm going to tell this lady that, you know, I like her, but not like that. I'm not that interested in you that way, to, you know, maybe she'd make a good wife. And from that moment on, I really believed that God had set that up. Like he had literally, at the moment, I'm going to say, I'm not interested, changed my mind completely by letting this heater core blow up and have this experience where we're having to work together just so we can get home. And by the way, it took us like 3.5, 4 hours to do that because I didn't have any tools with me. I had to get a hitchhike ride into town. We ended up plugging one of the radiator hoses with an old spark plug. Because this is the middle of the night. No hardware store or auto parts stores were open. It was a big, complicated mess. But we made it home. So I asked her to marry me eventually, fairly soon after that. And I'm thinking, this is all God's leading. God had chose this person. 12 years later, after not feeling like I was very wanted much of the time, after asking her, do you love me? Eventually, I didn't have courage enough to do that early on, but eventually asking her that, and her telling me, yeah, I love you, but me feeling like she just didn't really care that much whether I came home or not, being confused by all of that, frustrated by all of that. Eventually, we arrived at this situation where we'd gone to some marriage counseling and stuff like that, and our schedules changed. We weren't able to continue with that, and so we just ended up with like, let's see if we can, you know, work through some self-help books to try and help things work out better between us. But her response was, well, on Sunday. I don't want to get involved with other times. She was a teacher, and I want to get busy with that. And so I would try to do that, but then, of course, I'd get busy and I would forget. So this is how that last decision was made. I was trying to find a way to be persistent but not obnoxious, which is very difficult sometimes, especially in that situation. So I said, you know, I know you said that we were supposed to just read this on Sunday. I know I forgot, but, you know, can we try and do this because I'd like things to get better between us? And her response was, well, I'm not in love with you, and I never have been. And that was the night that we made the decision to split. And I was confused. And I was hurt. And I had big questions. How could you, what did I misunderstood? You told me this is the right person. You showed me this was the person for me. 12 years later, I'm divorced. I find out that she was never in love with me. And I had questions. Could I really trust God? And it really bothered me quite a lot. It took me a long time to sort of come up with my answer and make peace with that. But have you ever had a situation, maybe not that dramatic, but have you ever had a situation where you've come into and things blew up in your life and you're wondering, can I really trust God? Have you ever had that question? But I think if you read through the Bible, David's praying, and he's like, you know, in the Psalms, like, God, where are you? We don't have a record of what Joseph was thinking in prison, but most normal human beings would be like, God, I followed you. I did everything I could to follow you well. I followed all the rules that you asked me to do. I got promoted to head, manager of everything in Potiphar's household. His wife's offering herself to me, and I choose the right thing, and I land in prison. And I think 95% of humanity would be like, God, where are you at? Are you paying attention? Can I trust you? Doesn't say so in the Bible, but it would be kind of strange if he didn't at least have a few thoughts like that. Let me give you a couple of examples of this question, can I trust God completely? Let's take a look at Daniel chapter 3. not the prophecy part of Daniel. This is the historical part of Daniel we learned. Daniel chapter 3. You guys have heard this story before, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar had this dream of this statue, and he couldn't figure out what it meant, and he was going to kill off all the wise men. Eventually, Daniel steps forward and says, this was the dream, and interprets it for him, and all that sort of stuff. Well, sometime later, it doesn't say how long in the Bible, but sometime later, even though King Nebuchadnezzar was very impressed with Daniel's connection to God and the ability to interpret the dream, King Nebuchadnezzar's ego peeked through very strongly. And he decided, instead of making a statue the way he saw it in the dream, which was only the head was gold, and then his kingdom would pass away, and then another kingdom represented by silver would take over, and then that kingdom would pass away, another kingdom of bronze would take over. He decided, I'm going to live forever, or at least my kingdom will, and he made a statue entirely of gold. And then he decides, let's bring all the people in, and we're going to have them worship this statue. By the way, it was 90 feet tall, made out of solid gold. Can you imagine how much that would be worth? Way more than all of our incomes put together, I can tell you that. But anyway, he calls them together. He has them, they're supposed to worship this image. And Shadrach, this is Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were asked, along with everybody else, to bow down and worship the image. But they choose not to. Now think about the scene for a minute. Just imagine if you were there. You have everybody there. The king's in his little throne area or whatever, and he's sort of watching everybody. And all this group of people, they're playing the music, and everybody's bowing down. If they did it the same way they do now in the Middle East, they're literally on their knees, curled over with their head touching the ground. And there's 3 people in the back, I'm assuming they're in the back, I don't know, standing up. Do you think they might be a little obvious? And then they got reported. Apparently the group was so big, the king didn't immediately see them. Some other people reported them to King Nebuchadnezzar. You ever have people that say they're your friends and then when something happens, they report you? Yeah. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had some people that wanted their positions probably. And they reported to King Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar calls them over. Now this is very interesting because King Nebuchadnezzar, he must have had a very high view of them because he actually gives them a second chance. He could have just said, I already told you ahead of time, there's the fire. Why are we even talking? Just send you right in. He actually gives them a second chance. And he says, if we play the music again, will you bow down? And this is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's response. Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hands. Verse 18, underline these words. But even if he does not, so we know that he can, but did they know for sure that he would?
Not sure.
Even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Now, at that moment in time, do you think they're looking at this fiery furnace? Do you think there's a part of them that's going, can we trust God? Because if we don't bow down, it was really clear what was going to happen to them. And anybody here ever experienced the ability to go through fire and not burn up? Anybody here fireproof? Not me. Hot chocolate burns my tongue, man. I'm definitely not fireproof. You're right. I mean, even just the hot soup, people can drink it and it burns me up. I'm definitely not fireproof. So they had to ask the question, can we fully trust God? But unlike Adam and Eve, they seem to have arrived at a different answer, right? So is the question itself, asking the question, is the question itself evil? Can I trust God completely? Is it just asking the question, is that evil? No? It would be only reasonable for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to ask that question. And everything in the Bible suggests that they followed God. God honored them, right? Okay. So now here's the next example. We're going to look at King Jeroboam. We're going to look at 1 Kings chapter 11. 1 Kings chapter 11, and this is about a gentleman by the name of Jeroboam. 1 Kings chapter 11. Jeroboam originally started out as a leader, a supervisor for King Solomon. And apparently he did a pretty good job because King Solomon then promoted him and made him head of all the forced labor from the tribe of Ephraim, or, I'm not sure. Let me just go ahead and read it. 1 Kings chapter 11, we'll start in verse 26. There was also Jeroboam, who was the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zeredon. His mother Zeruiah was a widow. He was one of Solomon's officers, but he rebelled against the king. This is how he rebelled. He rebelled against King Solomon. Solomon was building the Milo and repairing a break in the wall in the city of David. Verse 28, Solomon saw that Jeroboam was very able and a hardworking man, so he put Jeroboam in charge of all the forced labor from the tribes of Joseph. Verse 29, at that time Jeroboam left Jerusalem. The prophet Ahijah from Shiloh met him on the road. The two of them were alone in the open country, and Ahijah had a new clothes on. Ahijah took off his new garment and he tore it into 12 pieces. So Jeroboam, at this moment in time, is now a trusted leader for King Solomon. Not his inner circle, but he's the leader of all the forced labor, and he earned that position because he did a good job. And now the prophet comes and meets him. Has Jeroboam tried to do anything against the king? No. The prophet, God's messenger, comes to him and says this. He told Jeroboam, this is verse 31, told Jeroboam, take 10 pieces, because this is what the Lord God of Israel says. I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hands and give 10 tribes to you. Was that Jeroboam's idea or God's idea?
It's the prophets say.
Well, the prophet said it, but whose idea was it? God. Jeroboam wasn't trying to do this. God is just letting him know this is the plan. He will have one tribe left because of my servant David and Jerusalem, the city I've chosen from all the tribes of Israel. Verse 33, I will do this because he has abandoned me and worshipped Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidons, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, god of Ammon. He has not followed my ways. He did not do what I consider right or keep my laws or decrees as his father David did. So then the prophet goes on to explain why God is planning to remove 10 kingdoms from Solomon and give them to Jeroboam. Verse 37, I chose you because you can rule everything, or I chose you so that you can rule everything you desire. You will be king of Israel. If you will do all I command, follow my ways, and do what I consider right by obeying my laws and commands as my servant David did, then I will be with you. I will build a permanent dynasty for you as I did for David. And I will give you Israel. So he has God's promise, I'm going to give you 10 tribes, and if you follow me, it's not going to just be you as king, it's going to be your son, your grandson, your great-grandson. A permanent dynasty. What an amazing promise, right? Now, of course, King Solomon, being king at the time, he takes that as rebellion because now he's got a competition, right? And that's how he was identified as being in rebellion. But here's where that question comes in. Can we completely trust God? Now, the situation of how he ended up with those 10 tribes goes something like this. And notice this. When God says he's going to do something, oftentimes that's sort of metaphoric language. It doesn't mean that God came down and punished King Solomon. Here's how this actually occurred. King Solomon dies. His son Rehoboam takes over as king. All 12 tribes gather together, and they're sort of like deciding to confirm whether Rehoboam's going to be their king, right? And so then they come to King Solomon's son, Rehoboam, and say, your father, our former king, was very hard on us. He gave us a lot of heavy taxes. And we want to know, if we choose you as our king, are you going to give us the same level of heavy taxes? Now, Rehoboam had multiple people he can consult before he gave his answer, right? He says, give me a few days and I'll come back with my answer. During those few days, he went and consulted the advisors from his father Solomon, the old guys, the old G's. You know what they told him? You need to listen to the people. They're struggling. But if you lighten their burden, if you lower their taxes, they're going to love you. They're going to be loyal to you. You really need to listen. But then he went and listened to his fellow people his age, the young guys. And they're like, oh man, these people, they need to know who's boss. You need to show them who's boss. You need to tell them, my father made your life hard. I'm going to make your life doubly hard. He punished you with whips. I'm going to punish you with scorpions. Who do you think he listened to?
The young ones.
The young men. And so he comes back with this message to all the representatives for all 12 tribes and says, you think my father was hard on you. You ain't seen nothing. And 10 of the tribes are like, pooh! What? We came to you asking for help. I don't think so. What part do we have in Jesse? Jesse was David's father. What part do we have in David's dynasty? Solomon's dynasty. Solomon's sons. We don't want anything to do with you. We're going to leave. And by the way, we've heard this guy Jeroboam might be king. And so they go ahead and choose him as king. God didn't actually make that happen. What he did was he knew in the future that Solomon's son was going to be arrogant. He knew because Solomon had been following all these other gods that he needed to let them go. God could no longer provide his supernatural protection for them. So he knew he was going to have to remove his protection. And he knew that Solomon's son was going to choose the arrogant path. And so that's how Jeroboam actually ended up with those 10 tribes. But now Jeroboam has these 10 tribes, right? But where is the temple? In Jerusalem, in Judah, in Rehoboam's territory. So now Jeroboam is king of these 10 tribes, but every year, perhaps multiple times a year, they're traveling down to Jerusalem for at least the Passover and possibly other feasts to worship God. And so now Jeroboam's thinking, wow, I have these 10 tribes, but if they keep going down there, eventually, maybe Rehoboam will be nicer to them. Maybe they'll decide, well, he is the legitimate descendant of our former king. Maybe they'll switch sides and they'll join him. Do you hear the question? Can I trust God completely? God promised me a permanent dynasty, but I see an opportunity where I might lose it. Can I trust God completely? Do you hear that? So here we are. We're going to read 1 Kings chapter 12. We're going to skip part of chapter 11. 1 Kings chapter 12, starting in verse 25. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 25. Jeroboam rebuilt Shechem in the hills of Ephraim and lived there. Then he left that place and he built Penuel. Verse 26. He said to himself, the kingdom will probably return to David's dynasty now. King Rehoboam of Judah, the former master of these people, will regain popularity if they go to sacrifice in the Lord's temple in Jerusalem. Then they will kill me and return to King Rehoboam of Judah. Can I trust God completely? Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their answer was, can I trust God completely? Shadrach and Abednego, Meshach and Abednego, they answered the question with what? Yes. Here's what King Rehoboam does. Verse 28, after seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said, you've been worshiping in Jerusalem long enough. Israel, here are your gods who brought you out of Egypt. Verse 29, he put one in Bethel and the other in Dan. Worshipping them became Israel's sin. The people went as far as Dan to worship one calf. Jeroboam built worship sites on hilltops. He appointed men who were not descended from Levi to be priests. Jeroboam appointed a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, just like the festival in Judah. He deliberately, intentionally replaced their entire worship system so the people wouldn't go down to Jerusalem. Why? Because he was not sure that God would keep the kingdom for him. What happened? What were the results of his decision? Well, you can read that later on. It's in 1 Kings chapter 11. But this is, it's later in 1 Kings. I apologize. 11? Yeah. So when I jumped ahead of myself, I apologize. But the question ends up being, can I trust God completely? And Jeroboam isn't too sure. So he creates this whole worship system to basically replace worship of God in Jerusalem. But if he'd really listened to God, didn't God make it pretty clear? We just go back to what we read in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 37. I will choose you so you can rule over everything you desire. You will be king of Israel, verse 38. If you will do all I command, follow my ways, and do what I consider right by obeying my laws and commandments that my servant David did, then I will be with you. I will build a permanent dynasty for you as I did for David, and I will give you Israel. God had already answered the question if he had just trusted God. All of this happened because he was in fear and doubt. He didn't start out going, oh, as soon as I get these 10 tribes, I'm going to turn them away from God. I'm going to make them worship golden calves. That's not how he started. He started out trying to follow God. You want to make me king of these 10 tribes? Oh, okay. He didn't fight for it. He didn't take it. He just accepted it. But once he had it, he became afraid of losing it. And that fear, that question, can I trust God completely? And his doubt of how God would respond led him to create a whole different process. What was the result long term? Well, if you read on in 1 Kings chapter 14, I'm just giving you a summary, but if you read on in 1 Kings chapter 14, this is what ends up happening with Jeroboam. He's king there, he gets older, he has a son. His son's very sick. He sends his wife disguised, because now they're all worshiping something other than God, right? So he has his wife disguised, goes to the prophet, because he still realizes who God really is, and he has his wife ask the prophet, will our son live or die? First thing out of the blind prophet's voice, he was blind by the way, why are you disguising yourself? God had told him who that woman was. And then he delivers some really bad news. Everybody in Jeroboam's family will die. There will be no descendants left at all. And in fact, when you go home, the moment you cross the entryway of your door, your son will die. And that's what happened. He asked the question, can I trust God completely? But his answer was, I'm not sure. But aren't we in the same position as Jeroboam? Hasn't God given us promises? Let's take a look at Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4, verse 19. My God will richly fill your every need in a glorious way through Christ Jesus. Every need. Richly. Through the glory of Christ Jesus. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5. Don't love money. Be happy with what you have because God has said, I will never abandon you or leave you. Verse 6. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mortals do to me? God has promised to provide us everything. But then we get in situations where it looks like we're not going to have everything we need, and we end up asking this question, can we trust God completely? Can we trust his promises completely? Now you might be wondering about the second time I went through such doubt, right? Well, that was much more recent. That's actually the reason why this sermon came about. My mom, the one time in my life I've been grateful that she was a pack rat, saved all kinds of stuff. I think there was like 4.5 boxes of pictures and knickknacks and different stuff that she had saved. And I went through all of that stuff, preparing the video for my mom's memorial and other stuff. I threw more than half of it away. But in the process of doing that, I came across some stuff that was actually very surprising to me. You see, my mom had her good points and she blessed my life tremendously. My dad has his good points and he's blessed my life tremendously. But the reality was, they had problems for a long time. I can still remember my brother and I being out in the barn, and I don't know how old I was, but I feel like I'm somewhere between 8 and maybe 10 or 12 years old at the very oldest. And we were discussing whether or not we wanted our parents to get divorced. Now, we didn't know anybody who'd been divorced. Okay? So this whole idea was like, I don't know what's going to happen. We ultimately could not decide. But what we knew for sure is we wanted the yelling to stop. We wanted the fighting to stop. My dad never hit my mom, but there were some doors that needed to be repaired, some walls that needed to be fixed. And there was just lots of anger, conflict, frustration. And we wanted that to stop. But we had no idea how that would happen, so we never really brought it up again. But that's the world I grew up in. And then, shockingly enough to me, I read this stuff that my mom had saved. I found a letter that my mother had written to my father. I believe it was before they were actually married. And she writes to him and says something along the lines of, I was trying to quote it, but unfortunately in my zeal to shorten this stuff down, apparently I threw it away by accident. I was very upset at the time. Apparently God decided I just needed to read it because I was never able to find it again. But anyway, she's writing this letter to my dad, and she's saying something to the effect, I really think you're going to be able to help other people get closer to God. At one point, my dad was actually thinking about going to being a minister, and he actually went to college to study theology. And so apparently that's when that time period happened. And she's writing this letter to my dad saying, I think you're going to be successful in bringing other people closer to God because you've helped me come closer to God and develop a relationship with God yourself. So my father had somehow helped my mother develop a closer relationship with God. Well, that sounds like a good place to start a marriage, right? And then I pull out my mother's Bible. It's in this box. Apparently it was, 50 some odd years old or 45 years old. And I open it up. By the way, if you were at the memorial, you see the picture of the Bible all worn and torn up and stuff like that. She used it a lot. In the front of the Bible, it reads this. This is from my dad. My beloved Sandra, may God be with you and bless you. With God as the center of our home, and by following the principles laid down in this, the Holy Word of God, we will make this life a success. With all my love, Marlon. So my dad's writing back to my mom. I'm guessing this may have been when they first married. I don't know. But they're starting their life together. They're both claiming this commitment to following God. 30 years later, they're divorced after lots of fighting and lots of conflict. Now, my brother did die, and that's probably the last straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. They were divorced soon after that. And I'm reading through this, and I started questioning in my mind. I'm like, it surprised me because I didn't see that between them. That kind of relationship was not something that I saw. I mean, they both went to church. They both sat in the same pew. I don't remember them ever having worship together, just the two of them. My mom would have family worship with us. My dad would cooperate, but they didn't seem to be really connected and supportive of each other. And I never saw them being spiritually united just for themselves. Never saw that. Not that I can recall. So it was very surprising for me to see this. And then when I read it, and I think about my mom's life with my dad, and I feel them splitting up, and all the years my mom spent by herself, I started God, what's going on? Maybe life was just a disappointment for my mom. And now, where were you in all this? Why didn't you fix this? I started asking, can I completely trust God? And here's where perspective comes in. You guys know what perspective is? I'm going to give you the Stephen Berg simple definition. It's the view from our side of things. Imagine if you have this big mountain, large mountain, and one person's on the north side, one person's on the south side, and one person's on the east side. On the north side of the mountain, there's this big paved road that goes up to the top. On the south side of the mountain, there's this little, trail, dirt trail. If I'm looking at the north side, I'm going to see the paved road, right? But the person on the other side, are they going to see the paved road? No, they're not. We're both telling the truth when we describe the mountain. Oh, the mountain's kind of tall. It's got this big paved road. That's my side of the mountain. They say, oh, there's this tall mountain. It has this little tiny dirt road. And the third person over here says, yeah, there's a big tall mountain, but there's no road at all. All of us are telling the truth, but we're only seeing a part of the mountain. We're not seeing the whole picture. Why does that matter? Because in my frustration, in my sadness, in my surprise of reading all this stuff, I'm only seeing one small part of the picture. I see, surprisingly, my parents started connected to God, deliberately trying to have their relationship connected with God, and I see how it ended. And that's it. And I'm, God, why? God, why? But then I tried, because I prayed about it, I struggled about it. I prayed about it, and I started thinking more about it. And then I started realizing, trying to see a little more around the mountain, well, the truth of the matter was, even though my mom was very committed to God, she was also very stubborn. Like, rules were the thing that you had to follow. She told me, even just a few months before she passed, that's how you love God, you follow the rules. And in fact, the way she acted, much of the time, the rules were more important than the people. And so you didn't really feel that loved and accepted. My dad got a dose of that. Both of them played a part in this, okay? I'm not blaming either one of them, but they were both partners in creating the problems they had. But one time, I remember my dad telling me about where he'd left, gone on a trip pretty far away, came back on a plane, and my mom was busy doing something that she was supposed to do and didn't take time to come meet him at the airport. That hurt him a lot. That didn't help things. And the reality is she did have choices. They got divorced. He divorced her. That wasn't her choice. But she could have chosen to remarry. She didn't. And she also, I started looking at, because part of the problem that was bothering me so much was this sense that, well, maybe her life was this big disappointment. But when I also came across some other stuff that I discovered, I found an essay written, first part of college, that said she was, from her earliest memory, she'd always wanted to be a nurse. Well, guess what? She achieved that goal. Her life wasn't a complete disappointment. And I know that she wanted her children to be with God. My brother was, till he died. Here I am. So that's not a complete disappointment. And then I kept praying about it, and I started thinking more deeply, and I think I saw a little further around the mountain. And I realized, well, but all I'm thinking about is this life here, from birth till 80 and she dies, right? But isn't there a bigger picture about all this? Eternity, right? Heaven. Well, let's just say worst case scenario. Maybe my initial perception was right. Let's say worst case scenario, her life was a disappointment to her. But she got her connection with God right. And she gets to live in heaven for all eternity with no more pain, no more sorrow forever. Was that success? Of course. I mean, 70 years of pain and suffering here. Are we even going to remember that 1,000 years into heaven? 80,000 years into heaven? 80 million years into heaven? Is it even going to matter? And then I realized, yes, I can trust God. Because he gave both my mom and my dad, despite their problems together, have continued on in their faith. My dad still goes to church on a regular basis. My mom was reading the Bible up until she was no longer able to read much of anything. She wanted me to pray with her. She enjoyed that. We sang hymns with her, and she enjoyed that. She wanted to come to this church. There was just physical things that got in the way. And all of that adds up to, where was God? Well, maybe he couldn't overcome their choices that created a bunch of their problems, but he kept their heart focused on him. So can I completely trust God, even when it looks like he let us down? My conclusion was yes. So let's return. Remember we talked about if eating the fruit is okay and wanting to be smart is good, then how on earth can all this lead to such terrible things? Especially when the question, can you trust God completely? That just asking the question isn't bad, right? So what creates the problem? The question opens the door, but the real problem is which direction we go after we go through the door, right? How do we answer the question? That's where the problem comes in. If we answer the question with, think about it this way. Let's go back to the story of Eve. Her question was, can I completely trust God? I.e., can I trust that God's going to give me everything that's good, or is he going to hold back something? And her answer was, I'm not sure. I better get it for myself. Right? Adam, he asked the question, can I fully trust God? Can I be okay if I lose Eve? Can God work it out even if I don't have Eve? Or can God work it out some way so I can have Eve if I don't do this? And his answer was, I'm not sure. I better join her. Right? Jeroboam, will God keep his promise? Can I trust him completely to give me all 10 tribes and keep them for me and my children and my grandchildren? I'm not sure. I better set up a new worship system here. Me, my question. If two people start their relationship, their life prioritizing God, but he doesn't fix them, can I trust him? And my response could be, I better control my relationship because I'm not sure God's going to do it. Do you think that's going to improve things? I've tried it a few times. You can ask Shirley the results. Wasn't good. So here's what it comes down to. We tend to think that sin is like people wanting to do evil, bad things. It's not. Sin is saying, can I trust God completely, and coming up with any answer that involves me having to do it myself. Because that's when we choose to go against the way God designed the world to work. It's not bad to ask the question, but when we doubt whether God will give us everything we need, we start doing things that interfere with the way we were designed to live. I think a big part of answering this question well, can I trust God completely? If you try and answer it from just the confines of life here and now on this earth, you're almost always going to come up with the wrong answer. If you zoom out and look at it from a perspective of eternity, you're going to come a lot closer to getting the right answer. But I would suggest there's one special aspect of this eternal perspective that can help us. And this brings up one other time where I really started to question about God. Not as severely as those other two times, surprisingly enough. But I still had the question. As some of you guys know, my brother died at age 26. 26. I found that out. Another thing I found out digging through all this stuff. My forgetter works really well, and so I don't remember the date. It's not something I want to keep in my mind. I don't need an anniversary to get depressed every year. You know? No, thank you. Anyway. Bottom line is, he died very young. Never had a chance to live out his life. And so, there's that question, why God? By the way, he was very much going to church. He was eating healthy. He was doing all the things that you would know to do. He still died. And I had this question in my mind, what's going on, God? And at that time, I prayed about it. I went to God and I was asking, you know what I came up with? I didn't come up with it. Here's what God showed me. That's a better answer. No answer but trust. I wrote a little essay. And in the essay, I realized something. As much as it hurt, as much as it pained my soul, and literally for a number, for 2 years or so, I really wasn't right in my head when my brother died. It affected me deeply. My mother passing has affected me, but not as much as my brother. And what I realized was I had this picture in my head. Here's Christ on this earth, doing what he was doing for us, growing up, preaching, teaching. His Father is in heaven, watching all of this. And then it gets to those horrible hours before Christ is crucified. He's taken before Pilate. They start whipping him and beating him. Now, what are you going to do as a father in heaven, watching your son get beaten and whipped? And then crucified and murdered. Now, I had sat with my brother when they pulled the intubation tube out, and I held onto his hand while his heart stopped beating, and I could literally feel the life drain out of his body. I literally felt his hand grow cold. but there was nothing I could do to save him. If there had been, believe me, I would have done it. But I was helpless. But God the Father was not helpless. I would say he was in a worse position. He could have easily ended it with just a blink of an eye. One word to Gabriel, go, would have ended it. That's all it would have taken. One word, and he could have stopped the suffering of his son immediately. It would have cost us eternity, but he could have stopped the suffering of his son. Instead, he stood there in heaven with his hands behind his back, and he did nothing but watch. And if that isn't the definition of torture, I don't know what is. And I realized, if God can go through that much pain and suffering, whatever I went through, he had to understand how much it hurt me. And he would never have let that happen if there wasn't some kind of reason. Now, I'm not telling you I know what the reason is. But do you see how that's the answer? It leads me back to trust. It gives me a reason to trust God. He understands the worst pain that I've ever gone through. He understands it. So therefore, I can trust whatever pain I'm going through, he's letting it happen for some reason. And I can trust that something good will come out of it. No answer, but trust. Can I trust God completely? If our answer is yes, he will always bring us back to the right path. Eventually, we will get what we need. Job was asking that question, and his response was, even if God kills me, I'm going to trust him. And what happens? That opened the door for God to continue blessing him, and he restored his life tenfold. Or double, whatever it was. I forgot now. So, as we go through life, we may be thinking, oh, we're fine, we're good, we're good people. People look at me, they're going to think I'm a good person. By human standards, I pretty much am. I don't lie very often. I don't steal much. I'm within normal boundaries. People think I'm a nice guy. But compared to God, not even close. I'm not good. And the moment we ask the question, can we completely trust God? The answer is the most important thing. Because if we choose to say, I'm not sure, we're going to go do something to meet our needs our way. And that's going to lead us away from God. Let's have a blessed day.